evening. My name is Dana Williams, and I'm a proud member of Metropolitan AME Church, and I also happen to be married to the pastor of this church, William H. Lamar IV. I am here in that capacity to welcome all of you and to extend greetings on behalf of the Metropolitan congregation on his behalf in his absence. We're so excited to have you in the space for all of the obvious reasons. Hopefully, since you have walked into the space, you have felt the really incredible energy in the space, and a special thank you to those members of Metropolitan who have served as volunteer hosts for today. There are also people who are members of Metropolitan who are happy to assist you in any way over the course of the evening. You'll hear a little bit more encouragement to go downstairs and to be in fellowship, in part because we understand how important collaboration is in these moments. There are so many things that I could tell you about Metropolitan. I could tell you a little bit about William H. Lamar. I happen to know him well. I could tell you about the incredible tapestry that you see around you and what it represents and why it is important for us to have those in this place, not just during this month, but always. I could tell you a little bit more about the people who have stood in this space, the candelabra donated to this church historically by Frederick Douglass, a baptismal font dedicated and given on behalf of a member who had been in this congregation since the 1800s. It's dark now, so I won't tell you. You'll just have to trust me that stained glass window above the edifice is an incredible piece of art that is the subject actually of art history work around church stained glass windows, and about the windows that are around you. I could tell you many, many things about Metropolitan. The things, though, that are most important for this moment are three, among many, many others. One, we are happy to have you here and to have you welcome in this space to essentially bring back into the space something that has been consistent here always since the days of the Bethel Literary and Historical Association of the 19th century, where all of the incredible, beautiful, important thought leadership, not just in Washington, D.C., but across the nation, happened from these very pews, and we're excited to extend that tradition today. I could also say, and I will say, a second thing that's really important is that we are delighted to have joining us a congregation that is important to us in the work that we do, which is also a part of our third reason. We're also delighted to have joining us Eugene Robinson, who I told in the green room, and I'll talk a little bit more about when we were in the space, wrote the book that I needed, even as I knew I needed it, but I didn't know that I needed it in that way, and I think you all are here because you feel that way. But most importantly, I think it is important to think about the fact that we are a congregation really insistent, if you will, on living out, believing, and being the gospel, to ensure that all who are hungry can be fed, that justice exists in places where injustice is more than an inconvenience, that imperialism has no place in a country that is committed, at least in word, to democracy, and that I absolutely will accept the applause. And to a place that wants to be recognizable to Jesus himself when Jesus comes back, thinking about what it was that we were called to do as a church. Part of what we are called to do is to think. And part of what we always look forward to with this series is the opportunity to think and to be in community with people who are committed to the work that we are committed to. Welcome to Metropolitan. Please enjoy yourselves here, and as we say often, not just every Sunday, but every day and every time the doors are open. Welcome home. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you the pastor of New York Presbyterian, Reverend Sarah Johnson, who will also help ground the moment and offer our invocation, and the program will follow thereunto.
Dana, thank you so much. I want to, in a lot of ways, echo much of what you just heard. What a joy to be here tonight. What a joy to be at Metropolitan AME in this beautiful and historic place, and also in the company of friends. On behalf of York Avenue Presbyterian Church, I want to say thank you to Dana, to Metropolitan, to the leadership and staff and volunteers and congregation for opening your doors tonight and for being such faithful partners. As Dana mentioned, our congregations have done important work together for some time now. We have done that through organizations here in the district, such as the Washington Interfaith Network. We have sat at the same tables. We have organized around the same urgent needs in hopes of pushing our city, our communities toward greater justice, toward living as communities, as Dana said, that Jesus would recognize. We've also done things like collaborated around the Scholar Program. We have learned together, we've encouraged one another over the work of faith and of learning, of listening to stories and thinking deeply. Partly because faith-seeking understanding is something that we know isn't done in isolation, but indeed is done in partnership. And so thank you for being here tonight. Thank you to Metropolitan and for this example tonight of what partnership can look like as we continue in relationship and friendship. If you have been to a McClendon Scholar Program, or perhaps you are here for one of the first times, you may know that the McClendon Scholar in Residence Program at New York Avenue exists because we believe that serious ideas, rigorously examined, make our faith stronger and our witness more compelling. And so the program throughout its many years has sought to bring distinguished thinkers and leaders into conversation, both with people of faith, but also with people of moral conviction. And not just to inform us about things, but to challenge us and to transform us. We are proud of this program, but especially proud of tonight's event. We are living through a moment that demands both courage and clarity about justice and about truth, about what it means to speak faithfully in a noisy and a fractured public square. Eugene Robinson has spent his career doing exactly that, with intelligence and with integrity and grace. There is no one better suited to this moment, and no place better suited than this one to have this conversation. What a joy. Before Theo gives us the lay of the land for the evening, let me open us with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, we know you are already here, and so settle us in the presence of your Holy Spirit. Settle our hearts and our minds from all the places and the busy things and the worries and the demands from which we come. And settle us here in your presence, in the presence of ancestors and friends and wise voices. Lord, may you open our minds and our hearts, that we may learn faithfully and discern wisely, and that we may indeed be formed more deeply into the people that you would have us to be. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Let me now invite Theo Brown, Director of McClendon Scholar Program, to give us the lay of the land for the next little bit.
Thank you, Sarah and Dana. I just want to add my welcome, say how great it is to be at Metropolitan again. This is, I think, at least the 5th time that we have co-sponsored a McClendon Scholar Program with this church, and it's always a joy, and we look forward to continuing this and other relationships in the future. We're thankful for all of those who are here, also for many who are joining us online. As I think you know, there's a webinar associated with this. We had more than 900 people sign up to participate, so I'm sure there are several hundred now online joining us from locations all around the country. Yes, that's to be applauded, that so many people will be part of this event with us this evening. If you are online, I'll just say, if you haven't already done so, we invite you to type into the chat where you are. We love seeing all the different places people tune in from, and if you're with a particular congregation or organization, that's great too. Since we're still in February, I want to take a moment and note that this is the 100th anniversary of what has become to be Black History Month. As some of you know, Black History Month was started by Dr. Carter Woodson, and it grew out of an event that he organized in 1926 that he called Negro History Week. He scheduled it in February because that was the time of the birthday of both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, two people who had been so committed, of course, to liberation and emancipation and equal rights. That's, of course, interesting to many of us from our two congregations, since this church, Metropolitan, was the church of Frederick Douglass, and of course, New York Avenue was the church of Lincoln and the Lincoln family. In 1926, when Carter Woodson started Negro History Week, this is what he wrote. "It is not so much a Negro History Week as it is a History Week. We should emphasize not Negro history, but the Negro in history. What we need is not a history of selected races or nations, but the history of the world must be told void of national bias, race hatred, or religious prejudice." Unfortunately, 100 years later, we still live in a country where a lot of people still try to tell history that reflects their bias, hatred, and prejudice. And that's why telling the truth about American history, and in particular African American history, is so important, and probably more important than it has ever been. That's one of our themes tonight. Yes, I agree. And that's one of our themes tonight, looking at telling the truth, telling the full history of the country. And we're delighted to have Eugene Robinson with us tonight to share some of his own perspective on American history and to share some of the remarkable things he has learned and discovered researching the history of his own family for the past 200 years. I'll explain briefly how the evening will proceed and then introduce Mr. Robinson to you. He will come and make some remarks after he's introduced and then engage in conversation with Dana Williams, who is, in addition to being the wife of the pastor, the dean of the graduate school at Howard University. And they will talk together for some time about his remarks and other issues that may come up. Dr. Williams will also include some questions from members of Metropolitan and New York Avenue who submitted questions in advance of what they would like to hear Eugene Robinson talk about. After their conversation, we'll have some brief announcements, information about his book and some other activities, and then we'll have brief closing remarks from Dr. Williams and Mr. Robinson before the benediction is offered. After the program, we'll be inviting you to a reception downstairs in Frederick Douglass Hall, and I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of the program. So I now have the privilege of introducing Eugene Robinson to you. Eugene Robinson is one of those people, especially if you live in the Washington, D.C. area, who you feel like you know even if you've never met him. Between his twice-weekly columns in the Washington Post and his many appearances as a talking head on television, he's a familiar voice and face to most of us in the room and to millions of people across the country. Eugene Robinson was born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, which he writes about wonderfully in his new book, Freedom Lost, Freedom Won, and then was educated at the University of Michigan, where he was the first black student to be one of the co-editors of the student paper. He later also was a Nieman Fellow in journalism at Harvard University. He began his journalism career at the San Francisco Chronicle and then came to the Washington Post in 1980 as a city reporter. I moved to Washington about that same time, and I can say that that was certainly an interesting time to be covering City Hall. Those of us who lived in the district that time remember that is quite a vivid time in D.C. history. He worked his way up through the Post, became city editor, then showed his versatility as a journalist by becoming the foreign correspondent for the Post in South America, then foreign editor of the Post, Later in 1999, he became an associate editor, and then in 2005, he became associate editor of the Post and began writing his twice-weekly columns. After 2 decades in that role, he left the Post in April of 2025. Eugene Robinson is the author of 4 books, which we'll talk about more later in the evening. And as most of you know, he is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for columns that he wrote in 2008 covering the presidential campaign of that year. Of course, he also was a longtime commentator on MSNBC and currently still serves in that role for MS Now. Eugene Robinson has spent his whole life writing about and reflecting on the American story, our country's past, our present, and what we could become. At this critical time in our nation's history, we're delighted to have him with us and look forward to hearing his thoughts and reflections. Please join me in welcoming Eugene Robinson.
Thank you so much, Theo. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Sarah. And good evening, everybody. It's great to be here at Metropolitan AME. I've been in the sanctuary many times. It's always kind of intimidating because you stand up here and you think Frederick Douglass, and I can't do Frederick Douglass, but I think probably I've been downstairs more times than I've been up here, however, because as all of you know, for many years I worked right around the corner at the old Washington Post building. And I had been working there for a while when I noticed that some staff members at lunchtime sort of, especially African-American staff members, sort of drifted away on various days from the crowd that was going, to the regular Washington Post lunch spots. And they always came back from their lunch happy. And so I tagged along, and they were coming here, and they were going downstairs to get some fried fish and some great food that was served down there. So this became a regular lunch spot for me. So physical nourishment as well as spiritual nourishment. I'm going to talk about Black history today, so I'll start with some pretty recent history. As you know, I worked at the Post for 45 years. It was last March when the owner of the Post, Jeff Bezos, sent out his edict that henceforth the opinion pages would be about personal liberties and free markets, both of which I like, but I also like social justice, and I like democracy, and I like human rights, and I like other things that he no longer wanted us to focus on. So I decided that was it. That was where I had to get off. So that weekend, in fact, before I announced anything, was the premiere of a new documentary about Katharine Graham. And so I saw the documentary and I said, aha, this will be my last column. So I wrote a column about Katharine Graham and the Post she created, and to leave that in contrast to the Washington Post that was, in my opinion, being destroyed. So I wrote the column, I was very happy with it, and that was going to be the last column, and then something happened. That happened to be when the Trump administration started going after history, going after Black history, and complaining loudly about exhibits at the African American History Museum and elsewhere that made people uncomfortable and therefore were wrong and un-American somehow. And that got under my skin immediately. And so I said, well, no, there's going to be one more column. Just one more. And because I had to write about this, there was just something particularly brutal and wrong about an assault on history, because ultimately it's an assault on truth. It's an assault on fact. It's an assault on reality and the baseline of fact that we need to have a democracy. We can't have a democracy unless we have some sort of common encyclopedia of facts and chronology of events. And the administration just wanted to get rid of everything that made them uncomfortable about our history. So my late wife, Avis Collins Robinson, had been a collector of African American historical artifacts and documents. And she, over the years, assembled quite a large collection, which I'm now trying to prepare for donation to the Smithsonian. And so I thought immediately of one of the first things she collected, and it was a document that recorded the sale of a Negro girl and her son named Caesar in Rhode Island in the year 1776. And so there were still reasonable and competent editors in charge of the opinion section at that time. So I went to my editors and said, look, I'm going to write this column, and this is the illustration, and I had a photograph of that document. And we need to run this big enough so that people can read it and people can understand it. And I wrote a column about how, yes, very important things happened in 1776. And so let's talk about these two documents. Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence, whose stirring words were revolutionary in their time. And let's talk about the sale of these two human beings, happening in Rhode Island, not down in the Deep South or any place like that, because slavery was legal and practiced in all of the colonies at that time. And I wrote about how those are both foundational documents, in my view, of this country. They're foundational documents of the United States of America. They both happened. And if either document did not exist, then the USA as we know it would not exist. In other words, African American history is, every month should be Black History Month, as Carter G. Woodson said, because African American history is one of the principal strands of American history without which this nation simply would not exist, could not possibly exist. And so if you're going to study American history, you have to study the role that African Americans played in that history. And I wrote the column in defiance, saying this is not going to change. These facts are not going to change. And so no matter what the Trump administration tries to do, and tries to suppress and tries to hide, here's this document, and I got it. and I'm going to have it. And it's going to be here long after they're gone. It was something I felt very strongly about. So that ended up being the last column I wrote for the Washington Post. I, at that point, had been writing the column for exactly 20 years. And I thought that was a nice sort of round number. After I stopped writing it, for the first couple of weeks, I just sort of wandered around my house saying, what do I do? What do I do? I don't have a deadline. I don't know, da-da-da. Some editor tell me, and then I came to my senses and realized, okay, this is your opportunity to finally finish the book you have been working on for the last 4.5 years. And so that's what I did. And during that period, that started around the COVID pandemic period, I really have been, when I wasn't doing my column and doing my TV, I was totally immersed in Black history because I was looking at the history of my own family in South Carolina. I had always known when I was growing up that my family had an unusually well-documented history going back pretty far. I grew up in a house that my great-grandfather built in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and he kept a lot of records, and so I knew it was there. But I didn't, of course, you don't necessarily fully appreciate what you have, and so I didn't fully appreciate what was there until I really started looking at it. And it was the first Trump administration, really, to tell you the truth, that, and followed by the pandemic, that made me sort of look inward and look at that history and sort of try to take it in. And it started telling me a story. And so I decided to pursue that story, and it resulted in the book that came out on February 3rd, Freedom Lost, Freedom Won, A Personal History of America. It starts with my great-great-grandfather, this is on my mother's side of the family, in Charleston, South Carolina, who was sold to a plantation owner in 1829 and was sold again in 1848, and who managed to buy his own freedom in 1851, 10 years before the start of the Civil War. He had been set to work by that plantation owner in a blacksmith's forge, and he had become a very skilled blacksmith, and that was what he had managed to use. Those skills were what he had managed to use to obtain his freedom. And he survived the Civil War in Charleston, and he had one son, born in 1856, John Hammond Fordham, who was the perfect age to take advantage of that brief period of Reconstruction when federal troops were still in the South and still protecting the newly won rights of African Americans. And so he went to the first accredited school for African Americans in Charleston, the Avery Normal Institute. He found a sort of mentor who was willing to tutor him in the law, and he became a lawyer and passed the South Carolina bar. He became active in the Republican Party and rose through the ranks of the party and became an official of the state GOP. He became a federal official at the Customs House in Charleston, a federal tax collector, essentially. And he moved the family from Charleston inland to Orangeburg, and he bought himself some land, and he built a house, the house that I grew up in, and he was a pack rat. He saved everything. He saved his speeches, he saved his letters, his financial documents, his bank statements, his everything. And so that was what I used. And starting with that material, I was able to sort of branch out and report the context of those times and what was happening at this period, what was happening at that period, what would have been important to my family. And as I worked on this, I started seeing a repeated pattern where African Americans, and I'm using my family as an example, would, through blood, sweat, toil, death, would win a greater measure of the freedom and opportunity that the Declaration of Independence promises, that the country promises, and then it would be snatched away again. It was 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, sometimes 4 steps back. And I saw that the classic example of this, of course, was Reconstruction, followed by Jim Crow. But I saw other iterations of this cycle, not necessarily of that amplitude, but nonetheless there, and it was unmistakable. And that helped me understand today. It helped me understand, as if I didn't already have a notion, why the election and re-election of the first African-American president in the nation's history would be followed immediately by the election of Donald Trump. It's not a coincidence, and no one will ever convince me that it's a coincidence and that it has something to do with the price of eggs. It's more than the price of eggs. It's another turn of this wheel in my estimation. And actually, we saw the wheel start turning. Really, you can go back before Trump's election. I think of the massacre of innocent worshipers at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston in 2015, and going down and hearing President Obama deliver that amazing eulogy there. And again, the wheel was turning. This whole exercise of sort of following my family through the generations and highlighting individuals, a great uncle who went off to World War I, to the Western Front, my father and all 3 of his brothers serving in the military in World War II, all the civil rights events that took place in and around my hometown of Orangeburg, including the Orangeburg Massacre in 1968, where three unarmed young black men participating in a demonstration were shot dead by state troopers. They claimed to have been fired on. They were not. And the only person to ever go to jail for anything related to that incident was the man, the organizer from SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, whom authorities blamed for organizing the demonstration in the first place, and I think for failure to disperse or something like that. He was sentenced to a few months in jail. The state troopers who shot the 3 young men were all, acquitted. Some things don't change. But going through this, and there were times when I would look at the next day's writing and I was just frozen. I would just say, in almost a kind of despair. But that's not where I ended up, actually. I ended up on the other side. I ended up seeing that this cycle of 3 steps forward and however many steps back and another 3 steps forward, it's unnecessary, it's unfair, it's wrong, but over time, it is being overcome. And we continue to press on, we continue to press forward. And reading and learning what my ancestors, our ancestors, were able to do, were able to accomplish, gave me hope. It left me with hope for the future. I hope it's a clear-eyed hope. The most poignant moment of my research was finding and reading a copy of a speech that my great-grandfather gave, and in 1908. And he had been a Reconstruction-era success story, and then, as you could see in his financial documents, he and his family rose, and then Jim Crow stomped on them, and they began to decline. So they were buyers and lenders for years, and then they became sellers and borrowers, and you could see the income going down as Jim Crow was imposed throughout the South. And so in 1908, at the Opera House in Columbia, South Carolina, my great-grandfather, who was still prominent enough to command an audience, gave a speech in which he listed how far African Americans had come since the end of the Civil War. And he said, starting with nothing, we have this many acres of 1,000 acres of farmland, and this many doctors, black doctors and black lawyers, and this many insurance companies, and this all adds up to economic activity of $1 billion, which was $1 billion back then, and we could do so much more. And so, addressing the white power structure of South Carolina, he just said, would you please just leave us alone? That was all he asked. He was just like, just leave us alone. Don't give us anything. Just leave us alone and let us succeed. It's better for you as well as better for us. And what was poignant about it to me was that he was a very smart man, and he knew that this was falling on deaf ears. But he got up and he said it anyhow. And I think he was, in retrospect, looking at that, I think he was wise. I think he knew that in the end, we as a people would move forward, that America as a nation would be wrenched forward, that it would be hard, but that it would be done. And it was really to honor them that I wrote the book And I hope it speaks not just to my family, but in a larger sense to the African American experience and to the American experience. All my family ever wanted, every generation, all they wanted was a chance to pursue the American dream. That's all they wanted. That's all we ever wanted from the very beginning. And we will not ultimately be denied. So thank you. Thank you very much. Dana?
I know that you all think I'm talking to you. I really am not. Thank you. Thank you for the sound up. What I was saying is I'm going to resist the impulse to ask all the questions that I want answered and try to stay focused, because I was writing as you were talking for a number of reasons, because there were so many things that I wanted to raise, but I pushed back. But then you raised them in the talk, and I was like, I got to figure out how to get all this in here. So thank you. And part of the beauty of a book is I don't have to ask you all of them. I can actually just read and read again. But what I want to start with is something that I hope will incentivize folks who are book buyers, book readers, library borrowers, Audible listeners. I'm still trying to get to Audible. Like, I need the book in my hand, and because if I'm listening, then I'm just like looking around and like doing things. Yeah. But for all of the folks who are readers, part of where I want to start is to talk just a little bit about why I said in the green room that you wrote the book that I knew that I needed and I was so grateful for. So 3 quick examples, one of which you started with, I'll start with that you just mentioned, something that you heard in your family, like, just leave us alone. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. I grew up in a small all-black town in rural Louisiana, and every time someone would ask my father or my grandfather, like, what do you want them to do for us or give us or have, he's like, we just want to be left alone. Just leave us alone. Yeah. So the first thing is the familiarity. When you read this book, there will be some things that are so familiar where you will say, I heard that all my life, and there's an interesting kind of representation of it, and the way that you captured that metaphor, I think, works beautifully. The second thing, I think, is the range. So we all know, for me anyway, having read like your opinion section for many years, that you got crazy range. So there's a point in the book where he starts talking about a Saturday Night Live skit. So there's something in this book for everybody, right? Then I think the third thing would be, we all have people who have things in their houses that somebody at some point said you should throw away, but it's so critically important that they did not.
Yeah,
that they
throw it away.
Yeah,
please,
yeah.
Please, yeah.
So the fact that all of these things are in the book is how I'll start with just saying, like, you just got to trust me. And I read a lot of books for a living. You got to trust me that this is a book that you want to have. This is a book that you want in your library. So thank you for writing it.
Well, thank you.
There are questions that we have collected from people that are members of congregations, and then if someone submitted online, and I'm going to do my best to integrate them because there is some overlap in some instances. But I want to start where you started, actually, with your career as a journalist. So this question really is about the moment that we find ourselves in with the media. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, it is from Celeste Garcia, but let's just make sure. And I'll also note that there is also an attending question from Beth Braxton. I would love to hear you talk about the role of the media in telling the truth about our history and the current state of affairs in the U.S. And the related question really is about the role of the journalists and how we used to count on journalists, especially to give us information in a synthesized way that we could process while also coloring it in a particular way. How do you see that role changing? And what do we do with that change? Where do we go when we can't have it the way we used to?
I could talk about this for about a week. So let's take a longer view. I mean, I've been a journalist for 50 years, right? And I was, in retrospect, I was very fortunate because my journalism career is basically been at a time when, except for the last few years, major metropolitan newspapers, again, before the internet, were thriving. And newspapers and the television networks, remember there were only 3 when we were growing up, and the news magazines, that used to be a thing, all had the same journalistic ethos, which was we tried to be as fair as possible. We tried to keep any sort of bias out of our news stories. Our editorial pages, that's a whole different thing. But there was a sharp division between news and editorials. And we took our mission very, very seriously. And there was sort of a shared set of standards and practices that we all had that I think really went into a golden age of journalism. And I am sad to say that golden age is over. Now, maybe we can make a new one, but the business model that supported major metropolitan newspapers is dead, and it's not coming back. And we've seen a rise of, in the internet age, of nakedly opinionated journalism, a sort of right-wing information ecosystem that is based on the fact that the most sort of sensational and tendentious and possibly incorrect, but juicy post on X or on Instagram or Truth Social or whatever is the one that gets the engagement. And so that's where people are, unfortunately. And most people are getting their news from social media and from I don't know, Uncle Fred or whatever, but they're getting it. They're not getting it from frankly the few really professional news organizations that remain able to deliver that news, and it's a tragedy.
You allude to it, I think, in the response, and I have a small follow-up, if you will, but one question was why you think the press might be shirking its responsibilities. Like, what's the fear? And I know that's a loaded question, but still, like, you work around journalists, right?
But I mean, I think there are.
Thank you, Victor.
Okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I mean, I kind of assume, I usually assume people can hear my voice whether the microphone works or not. That's actually, you can't really take that sort of broad look, because there are some very specific fears that specific news outlets have. And so, you know, if I see the Washington Post pull a punch, if you ask me why did the Post seem to pull this punch, and why did why is the Post shifted the focus and the nature of its editorial pages, I'd have to say, well, I don't know 100%, but I think it's because Jeff Bezos wants to have his space contracts for Blue Origin, and he knows that Donald Trump will take them away. I mean, that's if he dislikes what Bezos is what his newspaper is saying, and this is a change for Jeff. And to his credit, for 10 years he was a model newspaper owner, and in fact, during the first Trump administration, because of what the Post was writing, which was the truth, Trump took away a $10 billion contract, $10 billion with a B, from Amazon Web Services, and Jeff did not blink. He said, no, we're gonna do what's right. Something has changed. I don't know. He got a new wife.
Yeah. Since we're being reasonably shady, one question that Bev had also was literally, do you and would you recommend continuing a subscription with the Washington Post? Some of us have raised the issue. Do we cancel our subscriptions in protest of the firing of so many good journalists, or do we try to hang in there and to support the good work that is being done? Otherwise, you do end up following exclusively people who are monetizing for clicks.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I think in general, if you see good work being done there, and I do see, the journalists who are left. I mean, these recent cuts were not cuts; they were amputations, and the Post cannot be. It's just not capable of being the newspaper it once was, with so few people left. But the people who are left, the national political and government reporters, are doing very good, very tough reporting. They're digging up a whole bunch of scoops. They're being allowed to do so without interference, political interference. And so, for me, that's still worth supporting for now. So I'm keeping my digital subscription to the Post. I also have a print subscription, and that one I'm kind of, I don't know, because, and here's why. These recent cuts eliminated the sports section. Don Graham, Katharine Graham's son, Don Graham, who was publisher of the Post for many years, has always said he begins reading the Post every morning with the sports section. And I'm a Don Graham print section reader. I start with the sports section. If there's no sports section, I mean, that's why I kept getting the print product. So I think I'm probably going to cancel the print subscription just because it's not useful to me. All the political stuff I've already read online, but I wanted to see what the Post's great sports writers had to say about yesterday's Commanders game or last night's Nationals game or whatever, and I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I know there are some studies that suggest that sports fans are also like highly educated in some instances. Like the baseball folks who do baseball are also the people who go to opera.
Yeah,
So for me, it's sports and book world. When Book World left, it broke my heart. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I could probably live without a bunch of stuff, like the arts and leisure to some degree, because I could get it in some places. But Book World, it was the same thing. I wanted to know what the critics of the Post were thinking about really good books.
Yeah, I know. It's tragic. It's, you know, because the Post was one of the few newspapers left with substantial book coverage. And also, you know, you talk about arts and, you know, leisure. I was editor of the style section for 6 years, and the impact of the Post's cuts in that area are not just on, you know, those people, really talented people who are now out of a job, but it's on the Washington, D.C. arts community.
Absolutely.
Which just sort of lost its public square, and you know where you learned who was doing what, and you know there was criticism, there were feature stories, just awful. So someone will fill that vacuum, and if the Washington Post won't do it, then someone is gonna, you know, if I had a spare $5 or $6 billion, I might start a local publication that covered, you know, in the Washington, D.C. area of 6 million people that covered, you know, local news, sports, and arts.
I want to come back to that in a bit, but I want to go back to the book in a bit because there are actually a couple of questions about our what do we do next, and I think what you're talking about now speaks to that. But Evelyn Ying, and if you're here, please just shout out, ask the question, what toll did researching and telling the story of your own family and struggles in your family have on you as a writer? And then on the other hand, what would you share as perhaps your biggest reward for doing this? Because writing really is both a lonesome process, a rewarding process, but also can take an emotional toll on you in ways that,
well, you know, the emotional toll, the worst for me was so I would the house that I grew up in, that my great-grandfather built, is it's still there, and my sister and I own it, and so I would go down, I'd fly down to South Carolina, I'd take an empty suitcase, and I would go over to the house, and I'd just fill it up with papers. And the part that was just crushing to me was watching my great-grandfather, his sort of rise and fall, the fall caused by Jim Crow. And, you know, I'd have the papers on the floor of my study, and I'd be you know, charting like financial, you know, looking at bank balances and stuff like that over time, and just seeing them over time. And it was just so, it was really sad, because this was a man who was as American and patriotic and church-going, and he was just as solid a citizen as you could ever imagine, who wanted nothing but the best for this country, nothing but the best for his family, and he was really talented and really smart and accomplished, and the ability to be, not just to be all that he could be, but to be half of what he could be, was just taken away and was denied. And that, and it just, that just broke me up. That was bad for me. And really what I learned was how generation after generation, as I said earlier in the talk, all people wanted in my family, and all that any of us have ever wanted, was just, you know, like it says here that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That'll do. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's just that, you know, just give us that. forget about us, leave us alone, we'll be fine. And that, and again and again and again, it's like, no, you can't have that. You can have a little bit of it, no, we're gonna take that back.
Was part of a reward, did you give yourself the space to accept any part of the reward to say, okay, what he didn't get to do, I was able to do in some ways, even as there is still the challenge, right?
Well, yeah, in this sense. I think I saw in every generation at least some measure, and sometimes a great measure, of sort of overachievement. And in every generation, I saw pushing against the barriers and saying, no, we won't be kept down. No, we won't be denied. And it did feel like, but it felt it at the time when I was starting my career. I mean, it felt, I think, I wasn't in the very first sort of wave generation of black journalists in the country, but we were just talking about Dorothy Gilliam, who was in that wave. But I was certainly early enough that we felt we were working for more than our personal gain and personal advancement. We felt we were opening doors, and we felt that the degree to which we were successful, or we felt successful, was less about, I got to be editor of this, or I got to be a foreign correspondent about it. What I always felt better about, and I think this is true of my colleagues, is, to whom did I open doors? Who are the people I hired? Who are the people I promoted? Who are the people I gave it, I gave that opportunity, or helped get that opportunity to get through the door.
Did you get a chance to do any reflecting on that as you were writing, or would you say that there was something more specific that became the reward for finishing this project?
Well, the reward for finishing this project was, I had promised my publisher that I would finish this project.
Just getting the publisher off your back.
So,
yes.
I'm a journalist to the bone. Journalists tend to be people who are fine with deadlines. I kind of need deadlines. So it actually felt great after I left the Post, and I could then just sort of give myself a deadline. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to finish this now. So that was really satisfying. I didn't realize, for most of the time I was writing the book, that at the end, when I finished it, I hoped it would tell the story well. I hoped I would reread it and like it and think it accomplished something, and I got that. So that was the big satisfaction. When the audiobook, I read the book for the audiobook, and that was an interesting experience. Because you sit down, it took 3.5 days, and just in a little studio reading the book, and I'd come to a passage or a chapter and say, it's not bad, and then at the end, I remember going home that day and just saying, okay, I'm happy. I'm happy, I hope people like it and find it worthwhile, but I like it, and so that's,
and that matters.
That's good.
Yeah, that level of satisfaction I think is really important. I want to shift now to ask a question that is really about erasures in history that the book tries to make up for, but also comments on. And this is a combination of a couple of questions, but the lead question, Jocelyn Harris from Metropolitan submitted, given that there has been a constant focus to erase, or an effort to erase our history, what specific tactics would you suggest that African American communities especially use to create, restore, preserve, and share our rich history?
Well, I'd say just that. Number one, if you have it in your house, don't throw it away. Find, keep it. And do what I think African American communities are doing across the nation, which is supporting institutions and museums that do keep our history alive, writing books. Several colleagues of mine, former colleagues of mine at the Post, have recently published books that illuminate various aspects of African American history. Cheryl Thompson is an amazing book. Lanae O'Neill he just published an amazing book. So I think it's important for people who want to keep this history alive to support projects like that, and to support the authors, the museums, the libraries, the people who are keeping it alive, and know that for all of its bluster and menace, this administration is not omnipotent, and that history will be there, hopefully it'll still be front and center, but even if it isn't, it can be put back front and center. In Philadelphia, just today, I think they put back up the signs about slavery that had been ordered down, and a court ordered them put back up.
Yeah.
And so maybe they'll take them down again, but they'll still be there, and we'll put them back up.
And we can also document ourselves. So even if you're not writing the history yourself, you can certainly document, because let's say they're taken down as if they didn't exist, but you can document as well. And I think also using social media to promote. There's so many different ways as we think about books and documentation. So if you can't buy the book, then you can borrow the book from your library, because the library will only order books if there are requests for them. And if you can make recommendations to people to suggest with reading lists, like just using things for our good as opposed to social media for the good to promote instead of.
No, and that's a good idea, and we should, maybe maybe I should do a list, for example, of some authors and some. So I will. Yeah, I will.
The related question is about schools, museums, and institutions that are being indirectly or even directly impacted by federal law and federal policy. You just mentioned the situation in Philadelphia, but I'm also thinking about concerns that Amy Sherrod had about censorship of her art, and therefore taking her exhibition to Baltimore Museum of Art, which is wonderful because that museum would have never been able to host in those circumstances.
Right.
So we have to go into those spaces and to support them. But the question really is about how can we fill in gaps that are being created so that our children and generations to come will understand the importance of preserving stories.
Yeah, well, it may be difficult for another, 3 years, almost 3 years. But Amy Sherrod's art is so powerful, and it's still going to be there. It's in Baltimore now, and I predict it's going to come to the National Gallery at some point, right? Yeah. It may be a while. I am worried about the distortion. If history is taught in a distorted way in our schools, I worry about that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a role perhaps for other institutions like churches, like churches, to supplement the teaching of history in a way that is honest and true and that doesn't skip over all the uncomfortable parts.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because there was actually a comment or a question here in the list asking about your thoughts about having schools that teach history specifically, similar to Hebrew schools that Jewish youth attend, separate from regular education. Here we see the comment, I remember classmates in elementary school not being available on certain evenings because these were things, they had to learn Hebrew language and history. So the question was really about, like, would you support, or do you think that that's a good idea? But your suggestion of it as an option certainly suggests that it's something that we should consider.
No, it's something that especially in some communities where, the pressure on truth and justice is particularly severe, and the teaching is really being distorted, that would be a good option.
So 2 more questions, I think, and then we'll begin to close before we move to our next segment, if you will. But Leonard Chapman from New York Avenue Pres says, and we've touched on this a little bit, but some broad strokes. Given the legacy of race in America and that you outline in the book, what the Trump administration is doing now to erase decades of progress, is there a what do we do now aspect in terms of how do we move forward that we should be thinking about? So some preservation of our own stories, supporting institutions and artists, other things?
Well, we should preserve our own stories. We should, and we should, they spent a lot of time preparing Project 2025, and a lot of people wrote about it, and everybody said, oh, no, they'll never do all that. No, they did that and more. And so it wouldn't be a bad idea to, Project 2029, and to figure how to fix all the stuff that's being broken, and to, institutions that have been obliterated, how to at times build new ones that are better, so there's I think there's some planning and that we have to do, and also fighting and resisting. I mean, there's all the stuff that's being fought out in the courts, and it's John Roberts is going to be a busy person the next 3 years.
This question is about your writing process and what it was like, particularly making the distinction between your experience as a journalist and then a longer form with this book project. But tell us a little bit about your writing process, the decision-making that came around the archival material that was available to you, but then also the things that were missing. There were moments where you tell us about looking for a thing and not finding it, but then finally finding it and making too much noise in the library, which is perfectly permissible in your instance, to be clear.
Yeah, no, I made a big racket in the library, but I've been looking for that. I've been looking for when did my great-great-grandfather, what year did he become free? And I knew it was sometime between 1848 and 1860. But I didn't know where in there. For most of the time I was working on the book, I just didn't know, and I looked everywhere for it, and I finally found it in something called the Free Negro Book, which was a list of all the free African Americans in Charleston that they compiled every year, basically so they could keep track of those free black people, because they really didn't trust free black people. They thought that was like a contradiction. So writing process, first of all, history is hard. It's much harder than the first rough draft of history, which is what journalism is often described as. But you're not writing the first rough draft, so you got to get the context right, and you got to report everything out and check multiple sources. And it was, So I found it difficult. And then there was, that was a research issue. The writing issue was that for 20 years, I had been doing a column, and that's no more than 800 words. And so I had learned to be very concise and to condense and to, I learned it, right? So I got to the point where I could do a lot of stuff with just 800
That's
words.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I've got this huge canvas to paint on,
and probably an editor who is saying,
yes, we're gonna,
more.
And I'm doing 100,000 words, and it took me a while until I could easily and comfortably stretch out my legs and let a scene breathe. And so for a long time, I would write something, and then the next day, I'd look at it and I go back into it, and one page had become 3 or 4 pages just by letting it breathe and giving it some space. And I finally got to the point where that felt more natural, but it was tough at first.
Yeah. So I want to close us with a couple of excerpts near the end of the book that will round out a question that we have from Arthur Sidner from York Avenue Presbyterian. You write on page 288, and I'll jump to 289 for the sake of being concise. My great-grandfather, Henry Fordham, was sold like a piece of livestock in 1829, and then sold again in 1848. Still, through skill and perseverance, he managed to wrest his own freedom before the Civil War. My great-grandfather, Major John Hammond Fordham, took advantage of fleeting Reconstruction-era opportunity to become a lawyer, rise to prominence in the Republican Party, raise and educate 6 children, and build the house in Orangeburg where I grew up. I keep in mind what my father told me in early 2008, less than a year before he died. Avis, and you've referred to, we know that Avis is your wife, and I were talking about the incredible fact that Barack Obama was beating Hillary Clinton in the primaries in overwhelmingly white states such as Iowa. Our consensus view was that in the end, Obama's campaign would fall short. None of us could get our heads around the idea that a black man could be nominated for president by one of 2 major parties, much less embrace the fantasy that he could be elected. I'm jumping a bit again here. It was getting to be time for supper, and everyone started drifting back to the kitchen. My father and I were the last to stir. He had been quiet through most of the political discussion, but now he looked at me and said, "Don't you ever let anybody tell you nothing has changed." Yeah. Where is and so I will not. As much as there is celebration, lament, grief, recovery, all of those different things in the book, there is also a significant amount of hope here. And author's question is, do you have hope for a positive future for America? And if so, what is the basis of that hope so we can hope too?
Well, Reverend Jackson, God rest his soul, always said, keep hope alive. So let's keep hope alive. Now, that was an interesting moment. That was toward the end of my father's life. And I reflected on not that long after he told that to me. Sure enough, Barack Obama did win the nomination, and he won the presidency. So on election night in 2008, I was on the set in Rockefeller Center, MSNBC, and it was me and Rachel Maddow, David Gregory, Chris Matthews, and Keith Olbermann. And they told us through our earpieces at 10:45 that they were going to call the election for Obama at 11. And so, I had 2 thoughts. One, okay, I looked around the desk and I said, well, when they call it for Obama, they're going to go to the black guy, so I better think of something to say.
That's right.
And, which they did, by the way, and immediately. And then I said, I hope that we have a break before 11, and we did. And so I could use my cell phone. You know, I had my cell phone on the set. I could call my mom and dad and tell them, you know, before they heard it in the street, that Barack Obama was the next president of the United States. And I was like overwhelmed for the rest of the evening after that phone call. And it was nothing they said. They didn't really say very much, but I kept thinking of the world that they had been born into. My father was born in 1916 in rural Georgia, and made the Great Migration both ways. You know, he and his family went north to Michigan, and then he came back south to marry my mother. My mother was born in 1921, and to think of the world, the Jim Crow world that they were born into, and the fact that they had lived to see the election of the first black president of the United States. And so that gives me hope. It gives me, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that, because the path was not easy, it was not direct, it was not always forward, sometimes it was backward, but they got from that point A to a very, very different point B. And so yeah, I think Dr. King was right, and that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So that's what I tell myself, at least that's how I remain long-term hopeful, even if, for the next 2 years and 9 months or so, even if I'm not necessarily as hopeful in the short term.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation and for a wonderful book.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think you stay in Theo's time. Yep.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams and Eugene Robinson, for all of that. I just want to take a moment as we get near the end of our time and share a couple of thoughts about how to build on this evening so that you can take the both inspiration and information from tonight and move forward with it. First thing is I really want to urge you, and you're already probably thinking about it, to get a copy of Freedom Lost, Freedom Won, A Personal History of America. I finished reading the book last week. It really is wonderful. You got a sample of it here. And you are in luck because at the reception afterwards down in Frederick Douglass Hall, not only do we have the book, but we have it at half price. Now, the bad news is we can't take credit cards, but we have a lot of $5 bills in our pocket. And if you've got a 20, we can make a deal. So it is really a wonderful book. I urge you to get it. Those of you online can order it from any really outlet where you buy your books. Secondly, just want to remind you about other books that Eugene Robinson has written. There are 3 of note. They're all very interesting. Coal to Cream, which he wrote when he was a correspondent in South America for the Post. Last Dance in Havana, the final days of Fidel and the start of the new Cuban Revolution, and then Disintegration, the splintering of Black America. You see the covers of the books there, and I highly recommend those also as ones you may want to explore. Just a word then also about what else we can do. I just want to underscore what Dana and Eugene Robinson talked about in terms of supporting museums, libraries, institutions that are out there, telling the truth about American history, and particularly helping to protect African American history, which is so under assault. So be looking for ways to do that, and in communities around the country, there are opportunities to do that, as well as supporting nationally institutions like the Museum of African American History and Culture here in Washington. So think of what you can do to help truth-telling in American history. want to announce briefly the next McClendon Scholar Program. You'll be hearing about it. We'll send you some information. But on April 18th, we will have Roseanne Haggerty, who's one of the most respected leaders in the country combating homelessness. She's the head of Community Solutions, and she will make a presentation and be part of some other programs that day on homelessness and the focus of what congregations like this one and ours and others are doing and what we can do together. Also to remind you, you can always get information about our programs on our website, nyapc.org/MSIR. It has information about upcoming programs and recordings of all of our past programs. And I highly recommend, again, you take some time to look at that. So as we close, I'd invite you online, if you have something you want to share, maybe you already have, to type into chat something you got from tonight, something you learned, something that you want to remember and take with you. We'll be leaving the chat open, and it's always helpful to see comments from people who've been listening to the program in that regard. Again, inviting you to the reception afterwards. Those who are here, we'll have some food, refreshments, lots of fruit, lots of cookies, and I hope you'll come by, even if you can just stay for a few minutes, chat with those others who are here, and greet Eugene Robinson. Finally, if you are here in the sanctuary and you drove and your car is in the lot down the street, if you can take your ticket, if you haven't already done so, and get it validated at the front entrance to the church downstairs, and that will cover the cost of your parking, but be sure to get it validated. There's a machine on the wall, and folks can help you find it if you see it. And I do want to remind you that the parking garage closes at 9:30, so you can't linger over the cookies too long, but that gives you plenty of time to come by Frederick Douglass Hall and enjoy the reception briefly. I want to just take a moment to thank Eugene Robinson again for being here. And just invite him, if he has a closing comment you want to make, anything you want to underscore, perhaps, or leave with us, something you wanted to say you didn't get to. But we so appreciate having you here. Glad to hear a final word, and then Sarah Johnson Austin will say a benediction afterwards.
Well, just thank you so much, Theo. Thank you all for having me, and thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. This sort of keeps me going, and the great thing, when I left the Post, it was where I had been for 45 years. There's a certain feeling of like insecurity and nakedness that you feel when you step out of that comfort zone, and it's wonderful folks like you who have made me feel at home in the wider world, and it's just so gratifying to know that people actually were reading all that stuff that I was writing and found it of some use. So I thank you for all the support over all that time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And we say thank you again to all of you, and thank you to all of the volunteers from New York Avenue Presbyterian who helped to make the event successful tonight. Thank you to the volunteers from Metropolitan, our AV team. When we first came in, we both said it was really warm. So that meant somebody was here to make sure that, this 180-plus-year-old building was warm. So we want to thank all of the staff here and the team downstairs. Just thank you so much. It's incredibly important to acknowledge the stewardship of this historic place for all of the reasons that you can imagine. It's such a pleasure to have you in the space, and the next however many years from now, someone will say that they were intimidated by being in the space where Eugene Robinson stood. Thank you. Reverend Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. Friends, I will end us tonight the way that we end each week at New York Avenue. Go out to the world with compassion and justice in your hearts. Give voice to the silent. Give strength to the weak. Hear one another. See one another. Love one another. It's all that easy, and it's all that hard. And may the love of God, the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the communion of the Holy Spirit go with you this night and always. Friends, we'll see you downstairs. Go in peace.